Well, thank you very much, Tristan, for that introduction. And I want to thank Monty, you, Matt, Mike, and the whole team at New West Public Affairs for bringing us together today. Now, I have to admit, I feel a little bit like a Red Sox fan at the Yankee Stadium up here. A little outnumbered. But on the upside, though, New York lost and we're in the World Series. Now, seriously, though, I was happy when Mike called to invite me to today's conference after he found out that Doug Ford couldn't make it. So still happy to be here. But let me just say it's a pleasure to be here joining you today on traditional Treaty 7 territory, and also the Métis people of Alberta share a deep connection with the land. To be here on behalf of Premier Rachel Notley and the Government of Alberta. Now, this is an important opportunity for us to share and to challenge ideas about how we keep Alberta's energy sector competitive. Now, I joked about just a minute ago about being on different teams, but the fact of the matter is we all want Alberta to continue to be Canada's economic engine and the best place to invest and to do business, and we can all learn from each other. Now, 3 years ago, almost to the day, Premier Notley created the Ministry of Economic Development and Trade. The sharp and sustained drop in world oil prices had hit our province probably the hardest. Every community, every worker, every business in all corners of the province felt the downturn and the effects. The Premier wanted to support Alberta industry during a very difficult time with a single access point to government, a place where they could bring their concerns and suggestions, and a ministry that would move as quickly as possible to act on them. So when she tasked me with leading up that department, I knew that it would not be an easy task. But I also knew that we have some of the world's best and most innovative business leaders, entrepreneurs, and experts to learn from. So I started by listening. I started listening to people like you, to chambers of commerce, to business leaders who were all looking and asking for government to help level the playing field. I can tell you that we've introduced over the past 3 years a number of tax credits that the business community has been asking for, that other provinces have enjoyed for decades, that has helped them diversify within their sectors, but also to diversify their economy. The capital investment tax credit, for example, the 10% non-refundable up to $5 million to encourage companies to deploy capital now when we need it, investing in new facilities, expansion of existing facilities, and investing in new machinery and equipment. We also brought out a program to help our companies access new markets, because we know that we have incredible expertise, in fact, world-leading expertise, especially in obviously the areas of energy, but as well in other sectors, including agriculture and forestry. And so we created a program to help companies access new markets. And of course, we've led a number of trade missions to help open doors. There is a critical role for government to play to help companies pave the way when it comes to other jurisdictions. And there's a number of very successful Alberta companies that are now also doing business in other parts of the world. I could make a joke about you taking that. Okay. Now, there's a number of things that we did that I think are worth highlighting, because number one, they came from you. They came from business leaders saying, this is how you can help us be more competitive and remain competitive. And one of them was the royalty review. And I know that when we first announced it and went down the path of reviewing Alberta's royalty system, that there were folks that were skeptical, there were industry leaders that were nervous as far as what would be the outcome. But I've got to tell you that the panel that we struck did a comprehensive review with leaders from across this province, many of you in this room. We looked at other jurisdictions and quite frankly came up with a new royalty system that rewards innovation, rewards efficiency. So companies will pay a flat rate of 5% royalties until they paid off their capital costs of drilling a new well. And once that happens, then the royalty starts to go up modestly. But I can tell you that some companies were so enthusiastic with the new royalty regime that they applied for early access. For instance, Encana spent $25 million to drill new wells in the Duvernay-Montney Basin in northwestern Alberta. And they said that spending would not have happened had we not made those changes to our royalty structure. The changes came into effect in January of 2017, and by the middle of that month, there were 247 active rigs in the province, 50% more than just a year prior. Now, as far as, and it's interesting that Mr. Kenney talked about regulatory efficiency, and I do agree that, and very proud that new regulatory processes with the AER mean new projects can get up and running faster. That creates jobs, and it also enhances our competitiveness. We also know and have heard that we're saving industry hundreds of millions of dollars. So progress has been made in clearing up the backlog of applications, but we recognize that we need to continue to work with you to identify other opportunities to be more efficient and to ensure that, that we are approving projects in a timely manner. As far as diversification within our energy sector, we announced a couple of years ago the petrochemical, the PDP program, $500 million of future royalty credits in order to incent and encourage companies to turn propane or methane into higher value products. In our first round, we had 16 applications from around the world that represented about $20 billion worth of potential investment. Interpipe was one of the successful proponents. They are underway in their $3.5 billion facility just northeast of Edmonton. That thousands of jobs have been created in that sector. Our second successful proponent was Canada Kuwait Petrochemical Corporation. They'll be making a final investment decision before the end of the year. I can tell you round two has just closed as far as applications. The Minister of Energy will be making an announcement toward the end of the year, but what I can tell you is that, as we anticipated, the number of applications from the first round have gone up. So there is significant interest. Round two is another $500 million, and we're anticipating 3 new facilities will be constructed, estimated around $6 billion. Now, the interesting thing about PDP is that nowhere in Canada do we currently upgrade propane and turn it into propylene or polypropylene. And so I can tell you that I met with many companies that operate in the Gulf Coast and around the world, and they said, listen, in Alberta, you have a cheaper feedstock and liquids-rich natural gas. You are actually the best place to be investing in. But the challenge in Alberta is that you have higher costs. You have winter seasons. You need to help us level the playing field. And I can tell you that we listened to them, and the brilliance about the petrochemical program is its future royalty credits, which means if the companies either are delayed or run into cost overruns, it costs Alberta taxpayers nothing. And it is future royalty credits and a link in a value chain that didn't exist, because nowhere are we upgrading propane into propylene or polypropylene. And so what I will say is that some of our opponents are calling for a return to the flat tax and investment will flood back into the province. Well, I can tell you we had a flat tax for many, many years, and there wasn't a propane to propylene or polypropylene facility. And so it was industry saying you need to level the playing field, which is what we did, and very proud to be part of a government, quite frankly, that has built on a legacy that former Premier Peter Lougheed began many decades ago to help kickstart our petchem sector. And we want to continue and look at all of the opportunities within that space. Now, in addition to PDP, we also announced the Petrochemical Feedstock Infrastructure Program. So that's $500 million in loans and grants to help build straddle plants, to ensure that there is feedstock to be able to construct these new facilities, whether they're ethane crackers or methane producers. We also announced $1 billion in loans and guarantees for partial upgrading. That will help offset the differential by sending more bitumen in existing pipe. Now, again, one of the fundamental differences between the previous speaker and our government is that we do believe there is a role for government to play in supporting our businesses, again, in leveling the playing field, and helping to encourage and create the right condition for investment. Now, one of the other things that we did, and I'll talk a little bit about the price on carbon. I know that is everyone's favorite topic in this room, but what came, one of the results of the price on carbon, and I'm glad Mr. Kenny did mention the federal government's plan versus ours, because ours, we have committed to reinvesting everything that is collected from the price on carbon. And one of the things that we announced, again, in consultation with industry and industry leaders, they said, you know, if you want to achieve your goals, an economy-wide price on carbon is the way to go. I mean, many of you know that we used to have the ESCR that was applied only to industry. Industry said we shouldn't be the only ones bearing this burden. But industry also told us that not only will a price on carbon, that's half of the equation. The other half is investing in innovation. Because if we're not supporting industry to invest in innovation in order to drive down your costs and increase your efficiencies, then it is only one-sided. And I can tell you that we announced $1.4 billion out of the carbon levy that is going toward helping our energy industry predominantly reduce their emissions. So we announced in that $1.4 billion, $400 million for oil sands innovation, $225 to help industries commercialize innovative technologies, and that's open, that's sector-wide. There's $63 million for bioenergy and over $400 million in loan guarantees. And I can tell you that, you know, when I speak to international audiences or even that within Canada, we have much to be proud of, especially in our energy industry. And as Tristan said, and I agree with you 100%, there is no energy producing jurisdiction in the world who does it better, more responsibly than here in Alberta. And collectively, we do need to continue to champion our energy sector, and especially across Canada. I had a great meeting last week with the Petroleum Services Association of Canada, talking about a Canadian brand and branding our country's energy sector. I think that's a brilliant idea as far as being proud of our sector, of what we are doing, because we really are world leaders. And so, you know, I can tell you that from the Alberta point of view, it's quite frustrating when other provinces across this country are importing their resources from either petro-dictatorships or countries that have low to no standards whatsoever, when we have real opportunities to supply our own country with our energy, which we know is produced the most responsibly. And I can tell you that that's one of the things I bring up in conversations that I have with the federal government at every opportunity. And I'll come back to conversations with the federal government in a moment. But I can tell you that there are a number of investments that we have committed and we are making because of the price on carbon. We are investing in Calgary, in the Green Line, as a historic infrastructure build. We are investing in the Calgary Cancer Centre, something which has been talked about for a long time, but we are moving forward on that because we know that there is a demand. And what's amazing about that center is we are showcasing the incredible health technologies and innovation that we have in this province. I mean, that's another sector that many Canadians and people around the world aren't aware of, the incredible talent that we have and the incredible research that is coming out of our province. The other thing we're doing is investing in flood mitigation. 60% of Calgarians work downtown. And I know for a fact that if another catastrophic flood like those in 2013 were to happen again, it would have catastrophic consequences for investment and for the business community internationally. So we're investing in flood mitigation. And the other thing that I want to say is that there are many people who are proponents of a price on carbon. I can tell you that ExxonMobil recently announced that they're spending $1 million to campaign in favor of the price on carbon. And part of the reason is because they have been investing in energy efficiency. They've been driving down their GHGs, reducing their environmental footprint. And so the elimination of a price on carbon means that we now reward the laggards, those that have the highest emissions and those that are not making strategic investments. We also heard that the Business Council recently has said that the carbon price means business certainty and rewards the leaders and innovators. Now, I can tell you that even with the price on carbon in Alberta, Albertans continue to pay the lowest taxes in the country, and it's significant. We pay $11 billion less than the next lowest tax jurisdiction, which is Saskatchewan. And part of that is because we have no PST, we have no payroll tax, we have no healthcare premiums, and our government reduced the small business tax rate by a third. Interesting side note on the small business tax rate, Alberta pays the second lowest. The lowest province is Manitoba, where the small business tax rate is 0. And interestingly, it was Gary Doer, a New Democrat government, that reduced the small business tax to 0. Now, talking about the federal government, this is where my blood pressure goes up, quite frankly, because it's been extremely frustrating when we look at a number of different things that they are doing. And so we will continue, and I can tell you that Premier Notley has been the biggest champion when it comes to the Trans Mountain Pipeline and an understanding that market access is absolutely critical, that it's time for us to start getting world-class prices for our world-class resources. And I mean, we're well aware and you know, engaging with industry on the fact that the differential is, you know, not only has gone from penalizing our country, our province, our producers, but it is completely handcuffing us and has and will have a significant impact. So I can tell you that we are looking at taking and looking at identifying what role we can play. Now, one of them, obviously, is, and you know, when I hear the federal government talk about a Western economic strategy, and they talk about everything they want to do, and I say to them, yeah, well, you can do that with the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I mean, there is your simple answer. Now, I can tell you that the efforts that we have made with you, working with industry in order to not only promote Trans Mountain, but also to educate Canadians on the importance of our energy sector, the importance that it plays to the rest of Canada, that we have had some success. And so before we started out, about 4 in 10 Canadians approved the Trans Mountain Pipeline or were in support of it. Today there's 7 in 10. And so Canadians are getting a better understanding, albeit this should have happened about 4 decades ago, that market access is absolutely critical. And as Premier Notley has said, there is not a school, a hospital, a road, a bridge, or a bike lane built in this country that does not owe something to Alberta's energy sector. And that is a message that we have been saying loud and clear across this country. Now, the other thing that we've done is we've recognized there is a role to play. And so we know that, for example, the Keystone XL pipeline is good for us. It will help reduce the differential. That's why Premier committed Alberta to 50,000 barrels per day in order to see the Keystone XL pipeline move forward. And so for anybody who says we are not in support of that pipeline, that is simply untrue. We are, and we recognize the Trans Mountain Pipeline is absolutely critical, and it's critical to our energy sector, but it's also critical to investor confidence. That pipeline is not just a pipeline to move product. It represents Canada's ability to respect and uphold the rule of law and to get projects done. And so we have been saying, you know, first of all, Alberta is not landlocked. Alberta is part of a country that has more coastline than any other country in the world. The challenge is that we have to start acting like a country. And that has been our message to the federal government, that they need to step up and they need to do it, and very, very quickly. The only other thing that I'll mention is that Shannon Phillips returned last night from Ottawa, where she was engaging with a number of folks. She met with over 50 senators and talking about Bill C-69. You know, the short answer to that bill, it is incredibly flawed, is probably an understatement. And we have been saying to the federal government, you need to make significant changes to this bill, or we're going to doom our energy sector. We recognize that that needs to happen, and it needs to happen quickly. I can tell you that Minister Phillips was very well received, as was her message down in Ottawa. I do want to mention LNG. You know, we're very happy to see LNG Canada move forward with a project. We know that there's world demand for our products, and so that is going to result in many jobs. We're going to export not only our resources, but expertise. And I can tell you that we understand the majority of benefit will actually go to British Columbia. But what I can say is, and why I'm proud to be part of Premier Notley's government, is that we recognize that what's good for them does benefit Alberta, but it benefits our energy sector, which benefits Canada. And I can tell you, I wished leaders across this country had a larger vision and view of the benefits of our energy sector, as opposed to their often incorrect but myopic view. And so what I will say, though, is our frustration and comments to the federal government is that you can't have a double standard. This country cannot have a double standard. You cannot advocate for LNG, which results in a tanker increase of 177%, while at the same time criticizing Trans Mountain, which increases tanker traffic by 14%. This is not about whales. And so we've said to the federal government and to the BC government, this double standard cannot exist. Both of these projects need to move forward, and they need to move forward now. Two other quick things that we are pressing the federal government for. Number one, they need to review their tanker ban. Again, we want to increase our opportunities to get our products to Tidewater, not limit them. And two, Premier Notley has also been calling on the federal government for an accelerated capital cost allowance. We know that that's been done in the past. It has led to significant new investment, especially within our energy sector. Minister Ceci and I have both written letters to our counterparts, and Premier Notley is calling on the federal government to explore, well, not to explore, but to ensure that we have an accelerated capital cost arrangement. Now, I want to tell a quick little story about, I call it a tale of two provinces. So back in 2015, in fact in 2014, we saw the global price of oil start to collapse, start to slide. I mean, it's no secret. That's why former Premier Jim Prentice called the election early. And now, after the election, we had a choice. There were folks that were calling for austerity because we knew that the price was sliding, and called for restraint and budget cuts. But we chose a different path. We chose to invest. We made a historical investment in infrastructure, partly because Alberta had fallen behind from many years, in fact, of decades of lack of adequate infrastructure investment, but also because we looked to David Dodge, the former Bank of Canada governor, and other experts who said, again, in a downturn, that is the time for government to be making investments. Your costs are lower, you're keeping people working or putting people to work, and you can get it done much cheaper. So we did. We also protected our frontline services, but we also, that's when the Ministry of Economic Development and Trade was created, but looked at ways that we can support the diversification within our number one sector, our energy sector, but also diversification of the Alberta economy. In Saskatchewan, a very different approach was taken. That's where they did bring in an austerity budget and made significant cuts. Now, I can tell you, if you fast forward to today, the outcome of those two different approaches have led to two very different sets of results. I can tell you that in Alberta, in the past year, over 90,000 new full-time jobs have been created. Most of those, in fact, more than 75%, are in the private sector. Meanwhile, unfortunately, and believe me, I'm not telling this, it's not with satisfaction or pleasure that I tell you that Saskatchewan lost jobs. Our job growth is forecasted to continue to lead the country for the next 3 years. Unfortunately, we heard that Scotiabank's forecasting Saskatchewan's job growth at 0. Our average weekly earnings are up 3% this month. Saskatchewan's a different story. So I can tell you that the choice that we made, I stand behind. Now, we do recognize that as a government, we cannot continue to run massive deficits. That is why we've pulled back on our infrastructure spending from what we initially planned. And I can tell you are looking at ways of more aggressively paying down our deficit. Again, we increased our spending and investment at a time when it was needed, and now is the time for more fiscal restraint. Now, I can tell you that not only have we created new jobs, but the macroeconomic indicators are very, very positive. Manufacturing is up, exports are up, job numbers are up. Last year, Alberta led Canada in GDP growth at 4.9%. We're on track to lead the country again. Now, Calgary is, right now, the fastest growing city in the prairies this year, and will be the fastest growing city in the country. Last year, Calgary created over 27,000 full-time jobs. Now, I say that with a recognition that the city of Calgary has been hit harder and felt the effects of the downturn more than any other city in this province. And we know that. And we know that there are businesses, especially small businesses, that have not yet felt the economic recovery. And that is why we have continued to remain focused on, and my ministry is focused on jobs and the economy and looking at ways to support our industry leaders and our small businesses, because we know that small businesses are the backbone of Alberta, and Alberta is the backbone of this country. Now, I can tell you that, and I'll conclude, I'm not even sure what time it is, Monty's giving me a nod. I'm happy to sit with you all day. Our programs and legislation that we've tried to introduce reflect past successful investments. Again, as I mentioned earlier, especially in the petchem space, but also looking at how we can support more partial upgrading, how we can gain market access to get our products to Tidewater. I can tell you that, in the petchem space, the buildings, the facilities that are being built are state-of-the-art. And we obviously have an incredible amount of expertise, technology here in the province. Now, our Premier has made it clear that in treating the economy and environment as mutually exclusive, we will fail on both. Our government has a plan that will work for people, cut emissions, create jobs, and position Alberta for the future. Now, as we fight for new pipelines and a better price for our oil, we also have to create the right conditions to diversify our sector and diversify our economy. And when I talk about that, as I have for 3 years now, that means building on our strengths. Strengths in energy, in agriculture, in forestry. And I can tell you that we have a growing tech sector and AI sector. I don't know how many of you know this, but Alberta actually ranks 3rd in the world when it comes to artificial intelligence. 3rd. There is incredible opportunities to continue to use artificial intelligence technologies in energy, in forestry, in agriculture, in manufacturing. And so we have continued to support that sector. And I'll give credit where credit's due. Support, especially for the facility that's out of the U of A called AMI, started about 15 years ago from previous governments. But I'm proud to say that we continue to support this sector, and I know that here in Calgary, there are an incredible number of tech companies and AI companies that are interested in sharing their technology with you and working with you. So with that, I can tell you, my message to you is there is a role for government, that government can work together with industry to ensure that we continue to be a world leader. And that is what we are committed to, and that's what we'll continue to do. But I want to say thank you to all of you for being innovators and world leaders when it comes to processes, techniques, but also what we are doing here in Alberta. I can tell you that our Minister of Energy, myself, and the Premier are incredibly proud of our energy sector. And we collectively need to be much louder and carry that message to all corners of our country. That we are proud of what you do, and nobody does it better. With that, thank you very much.